The 1925 Tri-State Tornado, America's deadliest storm. Probably still nothing against what's happening on Jupiter, by the way. By Tanman. I'm not gonna say the full name. You can see it. Anyway, we're going in. I have no idea what this is about. I don't know much about tornadoes, so there's that. So yeah, we're gonna have a look-see. Also, please consider liking and subscribing. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. And yeah, we're going in. Storming. Whoosh.
I am terrified of tornadoes, even if I don't live in an area prone to touchdowns. I live in West Virginia, and we do get some. The deadliest one to hit us was an F4 tornado on June 23rd, 1944, way before my time. This one was bad. It claimed the lives of over 100 people, but most of the
That's a lot of people. I will take over the tri-state area with my Tornadonator. Sure. I wouldn't. That would probably cause some issues, I suppose. But sure. Do that. Take it over with the Tornadonator. That reminds me of the burger video where, like, all these burgers, right? The fucking Tomatonator, the Bustinator, the Lily-pad.
time, tornadoes in West Virginia are tiny, short-tracked EF 0s, 1s, or 2s. Despite this, I am still terrified of them. If we are under a tornado watch, I'm on edge for the entire duration. Although I am terrified, this fear also comes with fascination. I am deeply interested in these storms, particularly older ones that shape the way we now view tornadoes. And while I don't want to say I have a favorite tornado, as that feels incredibly disrespectful to the real people killed by these storms, I definitely do have one I am the most interested in. And that is the 1925 Tri-State Tornado. This thing was a monster. It touched down on March 18th, 1925, and tore a 217-mile-long path across 3 states: Missouri, Illinois, and Indiana, breaking several records that remain in place to this day. The longest track, the longest duration, and, unfortunately, the highest count of fatalities in the United States. By the time it was over, 695 people would lose their lives and thousands would be injured.
Still a lower body count than Bonnie Blue.
Despite all of these facts of longevity, there are no photos, no videos, nothing.
Well, obviously, because it's 1925, nothing. You could just pull out your phone. It's like, yeah, here, storm. Look at it. That was unfortunately not a possibility. Unfortunately, but it's true. It was not a possibility back then. Well, now it is. But let's hope that we never get anything like that again.
To let us know what this storm looked like. We only have witness descriptions. So what did they say it looked like? Nothing like a standard tornado. You may have that image of a funnel cloud shape in your mind, but the Tri-State Tornado was a wedge, a massive dark blob, colored black by the sheer amount of soil the winds picked up. Many people who saw this thing didn't even realize it was a tornado until it was far too late, leading to that higher fatality count. All of this.
Wait, so they essentially thought it was just really dark clouds. Is that what it is? Is that what it basically breaks down to? They just thought it was really dark clouds. Huh, that's unfortunate.
And many more facts combined makes this twister the one I find the most interesting. And today, we're going to do a deep dive on it. From how the United States viewed twisters in this time, to its deadly track across all 3 states, and finally, discussing the ones left behind to put the pieces back together. Let's begin. At this point in American history, tornadoes were not being taken seriously. In 1887, the word tornado was banned from all weather forecasts, as it was believed that mentioning the word tornado would cause a panic far worse than any damage an actual storm would do.
Well, how wrong they were. How wrong they fucking were, I suppose. Bad decision. Terrible decision. We inform you that the tornadoes are actually more deadly.
Keep in mind, most tornadoes
Much more deadly. We inform you that this is the case.
at any point in history typically touch down in an empty field, kick some dirt up, maybe toss a few cows around before dissipating. Tornadic fatalities are rare. Tornadoes with a casualty count above 10 are even more so. But it wasn't like the United States at this point were complete strangers to deadly tornadoes. On May 6, 1840, a tornado struck Natchez, Mississippi, claiming the lives of 317 people, at the time, record. On May 27, 1896, a deadly F4 tornado touched down in St. Louis, claiming the lives of 255 people and doing $12 million worth of damage. A modern-day equivalent of $5.9 billion, which still to this day has the record for the costliest storm. Finally, on June 6, 1899, a tornado hit New Richmond, Wisconsin, killing 117 people. While all of these storms
Oh yeah, but it causes more damage. Sure, buddy. When his panic and hysteria killed over 100 people at one point, that probably is a very rare occurrence. Probably more rare than any tornado probably killing anybody. So, wow. Wow.
were dangerous, they were also sparse. They were over a period of 59 years. Meanwhile, look at how many smaller ones hit in that same time frame. A total of 2,762 tornadoes. Of this total, 5,397 people lost their lives. And those 3 tornadoes represent 12.77% of those fatalities. Of the other 2,759 tornadoes, they averaged a fatality count of 1.71, under 2 people. So deadly tornadoes are sparse. Very few people were concerned about the prospect of a massive deadly tornado. So, if one happened to hit, well, to say the American people wouldn't be prepared would be an understatement.
Well, of course you wouldn't be prepared, right? Who would be prepared for something this rare, right? Who would be prepared, right? Like, damage to infrastructure? Sure. Absolutely. Killing people? If it's like not even 2 per storm, per tornado, that's, yeah, right.
March 18th, 1925. A day a part of that transition between winter and spring where the weather almost feels perfect. One of those days where you step outside and aren't immediately hit in the face with a cold front. It felt nice. Sure, a few clouds hung in the sky, peppering the land with rounds of drizzling raindrops, but no one was complaining. It was far better than snow. In the town of Redford, Missouri, located in Reynolds County, a man named Sam Flowers headed southwest into the larger town of Ellington on his horse, Babe. Ellington was the largest town in Reynolds County, and Sam arrived here at noon. The town was bustling with workers on their lunch break, just like any ordinary day. Sam did dodge some increasing rain as he rode into the town, and as he was about to head back for his home, he noticed the wind was picking up, raising to about 30 miles per hour. On the horizon, he saw ominous clouds begin to coalesce in the sky, which was his key to get home. He left Ellington at about 12:30 and headed back for Redford. As he rode his horse through vast empty plains, the wind picked.
Damn, eventually Burr might have been riding a Pegasus at this point. Eventually. Because that does not sound fun. Damn, back then they still were around on horses in 1925. On the horses.
Up, as did the rain. He was also pelted hard with hailstones, which made him pick up his pace. Occasionally, he'd look behind him and watch as the dark clouds turned black. Before, at around 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, a wedge-shaped funnel cloud dropped from the sky, landing on the ground as it chased after Sam. Now, he knew it was a tornado, but he couldn't clearly make out that funnel cloud. The sky was a void, and the intense rain, wind, and hail wrapped around the tornado, hiding it. Sam raced hard on his horse, trying to escape the storm. He was in the middle of nowhere, stranded in a field, and even considered riding back to Ellington to seek shelter. It was at this moment that a piece of timber smacked him in the back of his head, killing him instantly. Meanwhile,
Well, how would we know about this? Obviously a made-up story because, well, dead people can't report on anything.
back at the Flowers home in Redford, Sam's wife Mary, their 4 sons, and 3 daughters watched as the horizon darkened, fearing a storm was on its way. And one surely was. Mere minutes later, they were huddled in a corner as the wrath of God bore down upon their home. The entire house was shook in the 70 miles per hour wind as raindrops and hailstones pelted the building. Then, just as fast as it came on, it ended. The Flowers family stepped outside to see that their house mostly went unscathed from the storm. Tons of trees and other foliage were scattered all over the place, but the entire family was unharmed. They were worried about Sam, but assumed he took shelter elsewhere. Their fears were reignited that evening when Sam's horse rode to the house by itself. But in the moment, the rest of the Flowers family could only watch as the storm traveled east, barreling straight towards Annapolis. Sam's body wouldn't be found until 4 a.m. Little did they know, he was the first person to be killed by the tri-state tornado, and by time it was over, an additional 694 people would share a similar fate.
Well, that's unfortunate. Quite bad luck getting hit by a piece of wood and instantly getting nuked. How's the video poker? Interesting. That is just unfortunate. At least his family was safe, more or less. So it's probably going to be really hard without a dad around.
The town of Annapolis was on the rise. In 1919, a lead mine had opened up that dug 450 feet into the ground. This brought in workers from the surrounding counties and states, and 6 years later, 9,500 people were living here. With this influx of new residents, tons of restaurants, homes, and stores popped up, ensuring Annapolis was very well off.
Well, they probably eventually weren't around anymore, considering that, this big boy went through. Why did you kill him? I am not responsible for tornadoes, last time I checked. I'm not the Chinese.
On the day of the fateful event, no one was expecting a tornado, but they were beginning to notice an oncoming storm. Winds picked up, and children outside of the Annapolis school were tossing their hats high into the air, watching the winds carry them further and further away. Meanwhile, in the main part of the town, citizens were finishing up their lunch and headed back to work. To the people of Annapolis, this was another Wednesday, but the children at the school would notice it first. As they continued to play in the strong winds, they watched across the horizon as thick clouds began to cast dark shadows. And, in an instant, the sun vanished. The children were ushered back into the school, and survivors would later describe the scene, claiming a dark red cloud was rolling over the horizon, originally believed to be a dust storm. We now know that the tornado was picking up tons of iron-rich soil in the area, giving it that dark red hue. It was at this time that the rain began, followed closely by hail.
Honestly, you'd probably be most safe in a big building like a school. I mean, sports halls were used as well to hide. So there's that. But
It pounded against the school building. Chunks of ice as large as potatoes pelted the brick walls as the storm continued further. People in the main part of the town saw this red cloud as well, and again believed it to be a dust storm. By the time they realized it was a tornado, it was far too late. Men were pulled from their cars and shoved against the ground. Buildings were torn apart in seconds, and Annapolis suffered against nearly 70-mile-per-hour winds. The storm only lasted for 4 minutes, but it was a very deadly 4 minutes. The school took minimal damage, due to it mostly being out of the tornado's path, but the rest of the town suffered bad. A man named W.E. Limley was eating lunch when the storm hit, and the restaurant he was in was completely obliterated by the storm, tossing him out of the...
Imagine you just doing your nom nom at a restaurant, and then you just get fucking obliterated.
Building as it went. He survived, and when he returned to the restaurant, his lunch was left on the table, completely untouched. By the time the tornado was over with, an astounding...
Bro could have just continued nom nom. Bro could have just continued eating. Well, that's outrageous. That's okay, bro. That's crazy. Come on.
90% of the town was wiped out entirely. As the storm waged, the men down in the mine heard what sounded like a train running directly over their heads. Soon after, the lights shut off, leaving them underground in pitch black darkness. Once the noise overhead ended, they came out of the mine to see what was going on, only to be faced with what could be described as a war zone. Their town was gone, replaced with strewn piles of debris and toppled over power lines. They were just hit by the tri-state tornado. A telegram was sent to the nearby town of Arcadia, informing them of what happened. However, the officials here assumed the storm was like most tornadoes.
A nothing burger. They probably thought it was a nothing burger, and nothing really would happen. Well, too bad that they were wrong, and everything would actually happen. Pug, why did you cause the storm? I did not. I'm just a normal little guy, Croc. Can you add? Yep, I have added it. This time for real.
A short-track storm that was now over, so no other towns in this path were warned of the storm. This, obviously, was far from the truth. The storm was growing stronger, and was about to cross into its second state.
Alright, now we're in Illinois. Okay. Let's hear it. I am the storm.
Illinois was the state hit the hardest by the tri-state tornado. Of the 695 people killed by the storm, over 600 of them lost their lives in Illinois. If we take a look at the tornado's path, we can see it spent the majority of the time in the state, leading to these higher figures. After the tornado
I mean, yeah, right? So when it started out, it probably wasn't that as worse as it was to begin with, right? It probably reached its peak somewhere around here, right? And then obviously towards the end, it's not surprising that it died down right here. So like this is fine, but it probably obviously here didn't cause too much damage because it just started. Here probably was at its peak as usual, I'm assuming, and then here nothing much happened again, I'm assuming.
Towards path through Annapolis, it crossed the Mississippi River into southern Illinois, destroying a few small homes as it went. It was on track to hit the city of Gorham, and at 2:15 p.m., the town suffered a direct hit. At this point, a woman was working in a restaurant in Gorham when she looked out the front windows to see what she believed to be the smoke of a raging wildfire roll by. Then, the rain, wind, and hail all hit at once, pounding on the creaking frame of the restaurant as gusts of 70-mile-per-hour winds blew against the foundations, before the entire restaurant caved in. By this point, the tri-state tornado was 3/4 of a mile wide, and it wasn't slowing down. Its next target was Murfreesboro, a massive town in the area that had grown in recent years
Massive town. I'm assuming this is also where most of the death happened. The dying happened. I'm assuming that is not what happened. GT. No, Croc. That's also the what has happened.
Become a coal transport spot which housed over 10,000 people. At the Longfellow School, children on the second story huddled in the corners, far away from the windows, as they watched the white clouds turn dark, followed by the loudest crack of thunder they had ever heard, like God himself had just clapped his hands together. Students looked out the windows and watched an ominous
Thor, God of Thunder, strikes again. Damn GT. Maybe I am that good. Maybe. Who knows? Ask stomachs directly.
black-green cloud barrel straight towards their school as they all began to pray. As the storm grew closer, the teachers decided to usher everyone down into the basement. The 3 stories were evacuated low, and as they went, the tornado hit the school. Almost instantly, the roof of the building was peeled away, and the frame began to buckle from the weight. This was too much for the brick building, and it collapsed in on itself, crashing down into the basement, where all 3 stories of students were currently.
Yeah, no wonder that like this many deaths, right? Probably a lot of people were stored in that building, right? It was in the basement, and then the building collapses. No wonder.
Seeking shelter. Meanwhile, the storm was headed for the Mobile and Ohio Railroad yard, and a worker here crawled inside of the piston cylinder of a train, hiding there as the storm hit. He said the engine rocked back and forth, and debris smacked against the cylinder like mighty cannonballs. Meanwhile, other workmen took cover wherever they could and yelled for their friends to do the same. Like the trenches of the Somme, these men hid and watched as their friends were struck and killed by loose rebar, bricks, and other bits of debris. The storm continued along, but the damage wasn't over, as what remained of Murfreesboro, which wasn't a lot, was now on fire. Embers from restaurants and the machine shop spread all over the place.
Damn. So, we know what danger it is when tornadoes combine with fire, because that can indeed happen. Right? Or heavy fires can cause strong storms. So there's this. That doesn't sound too good. I'm back from doing thing. What is this video about? A monster storm in the US.
Setting the town ablaze. Many men who were now stuck under debris couldn't move their bodies and were forced to watch as these fires grew bigger, and some, unfortunately, were burned to death. By the time this was over, 234 people in Murfreesboro lost their lives, the most of any area affected by the tri-state tornado. Those who were alive stepped outside to see a city reduced to ruin. Everything was gone. Detached limbs hung from still-standing trees, and objects were wedged everywhere. Here, you can see a massive wooden board that was flung through a tree.
Damn! Yeah, that tree looks fucked now. Wow. Okay, that's rough. Damn. That went right in there.
This was caused by the tri-state tornado, and is still on display at the Illinois State Museum. Survivors recounted how a voice came from afar. A young, injured boy was yelling to them, screaming, "The Longfellow School, it collapsed!" And they followed the boy to see the gruesome sight. And the survivors of the tri-state tornado began to unbury the trapped children, finding survivors and victims alike. By now, a familiar sight was taking place across all 3 states. Children were outside of their schools, tossing their hats high into the air and laughing as the picking up winds carried them further and further away. And now, the same very thing was happening at the DeSoto school. By time 3 rolled around, the children were back in class, but were hardly paying attention. Instead, they too peered out of the sky and watched as it darkened. Whispers of a storm were all the conversation. Similar talks were taking place across the town. Sheriff Deputy George Bullard studied a similar sight. The clouds ahead of him were thickening up, and they seemed to be standing still. Bullard wasn't sure what this was, and he stepped out of his car to get a better look.
What? It's like it's literally curiosity killing the cat, though in this case it is humans. There was a tower in New York that was not designed well and was at risk of causing a domino effect. They had to fix it with just a few weeks before hurricane season. Wonderful. Well, not really thinking this through, but what do you even expect?
He was then picked up, thrown through the air, and was never seen again. No trace of the deputy was ever found. The tri-state tornado had just arrived at DeSoto. It was at this time that teachers at the DeSoto school watched their curtains blow rapidly in the winds. At first, it was enjoyable. A nice breeze filled the classroom. Then, the rain came, and the teachers asked the boys in the class to go close the windows. Across all 3 stories, the ones who were asked to do so stopped to stare out the window. They were transfixed by the sight. Thousands of pieces of debris were blowing in the sky. Shards of sheet metal, branches off of trees, shattered planks of wood, everything. They watched this sight for too long, as all of the windows
Well, no wonder they got obliterated, right? All of the windows probably exploded immediately. Stuff was flying in. You were probably turned to Swiss cheese at that point, right? Especially if we're sitting too close to the windows.
instantly shattered, killing every young child who was just asked to go close the windows. The storm at this point was nearing its full strength. A mile-wide funnel cloud surrounded by dark clouds of rain, hail, and debris, traveling forward at nearly 70 miles per hour. As 203-mile-per-hour winds bore down upon anyone or anything unlucky enough to be caught in its path. The storm was, like many cities, over in minutes, but the devastation it caused was paramount. A survivor would later come out.
Not really surprising, is it? Basically, they bolted the beams instead of wielding them, like the engineer designed. Plus, the engineer didn't factor in wind from corners. I think this actually just breaks down to we wanted to save Munya, and so we did. That's really what it is.
Outside to see the devastation and the death that surrounded him. He wasn't sure what to do. He'd go to one victim who needed help, just to hear the pleas from another victim. He had no idea who to help first, and would later say, "It seemed that I was the only one alive." The storm traveled further east, wiping out multiple small communities. A large iron bridge stretched over the Big Muddy River was severely damaged by the storm, blowing it 6 feet off its foundation. The small village of Bush was hit, and shards of wood were fired into the town's water tower, sticking in it like oversized spears. 10 people would instantly be killed here, and 4 others.
More dead people. Wow. Hi, Parasaur. How you doing? You're doing well. Wonderful. Well, not that they're dead, but like the fact how unprepared they were for this, because simply the government didn't care enough, right? And they thought that how do you put this? The panic would probably do more damage than the storm ever could is very interesting. That is very interesting. Storms like these need to made illegal. That's like having no knife zones. Not really helpful at all.
Would die from their injuries. It continued along the rural outskirts of Franklin County on a direct path to West Frankfort. While the storm was tearing across Illinois, the men of West Frankfort were working in the mines like any other ordinary day. However, even though they were underground, does not mean they were safe from the storm. The tornado hit the northern part of the town, where a similar layout to Murfreesboro was present. It was made of densely populated neighborhoods and businesses.
It rained a lot, so here's my theory. It probably flooded the mine. That's what I'm thinking, right? Or make the mine so unstable, it started crumbling. It started, falling apart. Either that or lots and lots of water.
And the storm hit it hard. Meanwhile, men were working down in the New Orient Mine number 2, and noticed something was wrong when their lights began to flicker, before they completely shut off, leaving them deep in the earth in total darkness. Then, they heard the winds. But to them, it sounded like the world's largest train was currently rolling directly overhead of them, after which, the wind blew in through the mine, and all hell broke loose. Tons of dirt and dust were kicked up by the winds, choking the miners down here as the pressure drop knocked them to the ground. Some of them began to be pulled to the top of the mine as the entire foundation shook from the powerful 300-mile-per-hour winds. The I-beams supporting the mine shook and bowed from the winds, and some feared a total collapse of the mine in on the workers trapped down there. Luckily, this did not happen, and the workers were able to come above ground to see a field covered in debris pile. That's what the city of West Frankfurt now looked like.
It appears that they were still pretty safe down there, though. Not 100% safe, but it could have been much worse, it seems. My usual territory is the Midwest, like Wisconsin or Illinois. Well, this happened in Illinois.
Entire above ground was leveled, and untold devastation plagued the city. One man was crushed to death when a bull was picked up and dropped 25 feet down upon him. One man came back to his house just to see most of his car was now gone. Only his radiator was left behind. Across the entire field that was once West Frankfurt, chunks of coal were scattered, like massive black hailstones, due to the tornado hitting transport carts and scattering it far and wide. In fact, mining operations here would never resume. The company behind them decided to cut their losses and abandon the city. Tons of people were impaled by debris, scratched up, and otherwise gravely injured. It wasn't just humans either. One rooster was said to have been found stuck in a tree. The winds were powerful enough to pick this rooster up before plunging it beak first into the tree.
No fucking way, bro. They play chicken dart? Outrageous, bro. What? Fucking chicken dart. Bruh. No, that's just horrible. Who would do such an atrocity? That's just horrible. That's just... Damn. I wouldn't want to be this roost. Damn.
Lodging it inside so far that it couldn't get itself out. The rooster was still alive, but a total of 21 people would lose their lives at West Frankfurt. The tornado barreled ahead, destroying Caldwell, a small mining village. 43 people were killed here as the storm traveled to the small town of Parrish, completely wiping it off the map. An additional 33 people would die here, and the entire town was wiped.
How the fuck did that people okay, right? It is not. It's tragic that they died, right? Again, because people were just significantly underprepared for this because they weren't taking it seriously. Motherfucker, how did that rooster survive?
Wiped out, never to be rebuilt. It was like this for the rest of its track in Illinois, hitting small settlements without any care in the world, giving us that earlier figure of 600 deaths across the entire state. However, the storm still was not done. It had one more state to impact before it could receive its title as the Tri-State Tornado. And as it widened to a terrifying 2 miles in diameter, it crossed into Indiana at about 3:15. At around 3:20 CST, this
No, okay, now we're in Indiana. How much damage did it do there, right? Most people died in Illinois, right? So here we go. I'm curious.
Behemoth of a storm entered its third state to make it the Tri-State Tornado, and Griffin was its first stop in its final state. Griffin was located on the Indiana-Illinois border, sitting right along the Wabash River, and the citizens here were already on edge. The skies over the river into Illinois were a murky gray, signaling that a storm was on its way. And unfortunately, the citizens of Griffin were more right than they'd ever want to be. As the day stretched on, a rolling black fog appeared on the horizon. To some, its appearance was majestic. To others, they described its resemblance to an evil figure from the New Testament. Perhaps both descriptions were apt. The entire town was hit by the tornado, now at its peak intensity. 2 miles wide, a forward moving speed of 73 miles per hour, and with wind speeds peaking at 300 miles per hour.
Bruh, that's crazy. And that isn't even like storms that are even the most scary, right? There are even scarier storms out there. Right. On it's probably not the worst storm ever, which is interesting, right? I wonder what the worst storm ever in human history is. Well, that we have experienced. Certainly, storms back in the Dark Ages were much more powerful than this, but it is rough. It is rough. Wait, is this where Indiana Jones lives? Wasn't Indiana Jones named after like a dog that his dad owned?
This thing was a monster, no other way to describe it. As the storm hit, a man named George Westheiderman was working in his blacksmith shop, and it was instantly destroyed by the storm. Hot coals and molten metal spilled all over the floor, setting the place on fire as his multiple sharp tools became projectiles wielded by the wind. George was shoved against a tree, and a pipe picked up by the storm was thrown through his left arm, pinning him. After the storm was over with, George pulled himself free from the pipe and hurried home to see if his family was alright. Griffin was gone. It was a more rural town, so a ton of oak trees,
I guess. Well, now the question becomes, did the people somewhere, right? Did he still find his family or not? But that must be quite painful, right? Getting impaled by this, right? Into your arm, right? But honestly, probably still less of a worse fate than all the others. How the hell? Hold on. Hold on. How do you know this? You haven't even seen those movies? I've seen all the Indiana Jones movies. Yes, even the two worst ones, the last two ones. Even the fucking crystal thingy. Horrible movie, by the way.
were felled and knocked all over the place, blocking every single road. As George made it home, he saw one of his neighbor's houses was destroyed, and a piano fell through the top floor, crushing a young girl on the bottom floor, losing her life.
Bruh. No fucking way. That's rough. It's almost... It would be tragic if it wasn't so comical, you know, with the stereotype of people getting crushed by pianos. I guess real life art imitates real life.
By the time the storm was over with, over 60% of the town of Griffin was dead or severely injured, and the town was 100% destroyed. But just because the tri-state tornado had left Griffin did not mean their troubles were now over. Being right on the river, while a constant downpour of rain hit the surrounding area, meant the water was about to rise, and the surviving citizens of Griffin were about to deal with a flood. But we will come back to that later. Now leaving Griffin, the storm headed for Owensville at its peak intensity. This town...
Never mind, peak its intensities here, right? Okay, wow. The last one was the Disney one. Yeah, the one with the time travel. I'm that much. I'm aware.
Town didn't stand a chance at all. It was a tiny rural village staring down the barrel of Satan's whirlwind. Owensville was purely a farming community. About 85 farms made up the area, and all of them were wiped out. The only remaining trace of Owensville was the gridwork of barely identifiable roads. Unfortunately, once the storm was over with, a baby was found in the streets and was never identified. After it left Owensville, Princeton was next on its path. Much of the southern part of the town was destroyed, and 38 additional people lost their lives as the storm slowly came to a close. It crossed into Pike County at about 4:15 p.m., and 15 minutes later, the storm was weakening before it finally dissipated at 4:30, right outside of Oatesville, Indiana.
That's quite unfortunate. How well this The storm really didn't disperse at all, right? It just kept going. It at least just destroyed half of the city, but that's obviously not helping, right? But still incredibly deadly. But that's pretty much it. So now we're probably going to talk about the victims and people seeing this shit, I'm assuming. Hi, Lumpy. How you doing? You be doing well. Hello.
The tri-state tornado was now over. For 3 hours and 45 minutes, the tri-state tornado tore through 3 states, carving a 217-mile-long path, killing anyone it ran across. 695 people lost their lives, and 2,000 others were severely injured. But this kill count was initially estimated to be in the thousands. The United States had seen bad tornadoes before, but this was in another league. Complete and utter devastation was seen across these 3 states, doing $16.55 million worth of damage, a modern-day equivalent of $309 million. Now that the storm was done and over with, all there was left to do was to pick up what was left and put it back together in any sort.
Well, that's all you can do, right? That's really all you can do, right? You can't just rebuild. What else would you do except rebuild? You can't really do anything else but rebuild, and so they did. They rebuilt. That's all they could do.
The survivors could. You'll have to forgive me, as I decided to get sick right when I needed to record the final part of this video. At 4:55 p.m. CST, the offices of the Chicago Herald and Examiner were calm. 5 minutes later, everyone was running all over the offices as journalists scrambled to head out the door. The first telegrams reporting the tornado's damage made it to their desk. For the next 2 hours, recovery efforts would begin. News reporters headed out to the affected areas to study the damage and to capture photos for their paper, while others began to organize relief efforts.
It's interesting that we have no photos, though. Like, no real photos, at least, right? That's very interesting that we don't really have these. You know? Because, like, that's something you definitely, like, expect to have, especially for something that's, like, this rare and this uncommon, right? Since it's probably still the worst storm, apparently, from what he said. So, like, you know, you'd expect something, right? You'd expect there to be a massive storm, and massive, right? It's a massive storm, so like you'd expect there to be any photos of it, at least the aftermath being there, right? The massive aftermath. Well, we haven't actually seen this much destruction, right? Like we have seen some destroyed areas, but I wish there was more to see. Right? At least that's what I expect.
For the ones affected by the storm. President Calvin Coolidge would be told that evening as well, and he immediately donated $100 to the Red Cross, a modern-day equivalent of about $2,000. He encouraged every other American to do the same, and said he would not go see the damage himself as he felt he couldn't really do anything there, and an appearance would simply be political grandstanding. At 7 p.m., the first train was beginning to be packed. 3 hours later, it left, filled with 250 people who had no idea what they were headed to. Sure, they knew a tornado hit, but they didn't have any idea how bad the devastation really was. Other trains would be gathered up and sent, but they ran into problems on the way there.
I mean, fair. Well, you wouldn't expect that again, right? You wouldn't really expect this to happen, right? That's not something that you'd be willing and wanting it to happen, right? You wouldn't see that coming, usually. I'd assume, at least. Did you add the Mars? Yes, I did. Again, I did. It's added.
Tracks were blocked by downed trees all over 3 states. So, they had to move slowly, and men would ride along with chainsaws and ropes to remove the trees as needed. The night of March 18th saw a rapid drop into the low 30s. As thousands of people braced against the chilling winds, they had nowhere to sleep but open fields. And not many people slept that night either. As every overhead rain cloud and rumble of thunder, people would gasp in fear, with fears that another tornado would touch down. Some people during the tri-state tornado entered a full-blown panic and just ran and ran and ran until they passed out from exhaustion. Illinois would be the first state to send the National Guard, followed by Missouri, and finally Indiana. Also, citizens living in other parts of all three states got the news overnight and in the morning of the tornado, and they too got in their cars to observe the damage. This caused a lot of traffic in the surrounding areas. Unfortunately, some people took this as an opportunity to start looting. People would dig through debris to find anything.
Classic. I mean, at this point, who even cares about ownership of things anymore, right? Stuff is just anywhere, so this, I guess, like, fair finders keepers at this point, but, like, morally still certainly still questionable. Understandable. Unless you're not one of the victims and you just want to take profit out of this. That's a different thing then.
Of value. It was even reported that one man was stealing the ring off of a dead woman's finger, and he was straight up shot and killed for this. Doctors across all three states were treating people in these open fields, reminding them of the trenches of World War I. Makeshift morgues were also set up all across the place, as bodies were carried here for later hopeful identification. One Red Cross nurse described how she arrived on scene and someone approached her, holding a human skull, telling her they found it and weren't sure what to do with it. As these people stumbled around in the dark, they began to step on nails and other shards of rusty metal, developing tetanus. The stock of vaccine quickly ran out.
Well, that sucks. Yeah, that's unfortunate. Ew. Well, that probably spread like a wildfire. I'm assuming. Sure, Zoom. But to be the CEO of sex, you would need to know what sex is. Which I'm pretty sure this character does not.
And getting more out here would be a challenge, as it had a short shelf life and needed to be kept refrigerated. So, 2 pilots volunteered to bring it in. 750 vials of the vaccine were loaded into an airplane in Indianapolis and was first transported to Carbondale, and then Murfreesboro in the first ever medical emergency flight in the United States. It wasn't just the wind that people had to worry.
For straight up blicky warnings later. Pretty much. I added a Croc Rock, I just don't know if I'll watch it today. I've definitely 2 videos I have to watch today still.
About, as the tri-state tornado posed many threats to people. And as we alluded to earlier, the waters of the Wabash River began to rise in Griffin. After the oppressive rains of the tri-state tornado ceased, countless thunderstorms still rang out across the Ohio Valley region, leading to the waters of the Wabash River to rise. This was a problem for Griffin, Indiana, as they were only 6 miles away from the Wabash. As we mentioned earlier, the town was hit hard and was almost completely wiped out. There was only one building left standing, a 2-story house built by German immigrants. The survivors of Griffin came to this house to live for a while, as they watched the waters slowly rise. Supplies would get to the town, and several tents were set up across the area. But the waters of the river would not slow down, and roads in the Griffin began to be washed out. In addition to this, some of the bridges were sitting right at water level, and debris carried by the river brushed against these bridges, damaging them. It was feared they would be completely washed out, so supplies were stockpiled inside the town should the survivors become stranded. These fears were accurate, as the remaining parts of Griffin were completely flooded, and an evacuation of the survivors had to be carried out by boat.
Yeah, no wonder, right? That pretty much makes sense, right? So I'm not particularly surprised that this happened, I guess. But yeah, not really. Not from what I can tell. So there's that. Yeah, I don't know. It's just interesting, I suppose. It's a bit, how do you say this? I don't know. They were so underprepared simply because the government was like, yeah, actually, I don't give much of a shit. Like, that's really what it is.
They left their home, and some wondered if they would ever come back. As this took place, communities across the area came together to help any way they could. This even stretched across the entire United States. As $1.5 million, a modern-day equivalent of $28 million, were raised through the Red Cross. This money was put to good use, as the injured people were treated and communities began to rebuild. Carpenters, bricklayers, and electricians all came from the surrounding areas to rebuild these devastated areas. Well, most of them. Some of them were deemed far too gone and were mostly abandoned. The best well-known example of this was Parrish, a town in Illinois, whose name became ironic. It was wiped out by the tri-state tornado and was never rebuilt. This was a pretty rare case though, as the surviving communities all did come together the best they could to get their lives back on track. So while you may think the tri-state tornado is just a story of total devastation, it also shows us that humans will always come together to look after one another.
The thing is, while that's true, nowadays I partially even disagree. Yeah, people come together. Or, well, they try to come together. We know that the government doesn't. Never. It does not really anywhere, right? We had an issue where we had massive floodings, right? A while back, right? Which, obviously, the government didn't come for help. They didn't help anybody. You just were fucked at that point.
After the unimaginable affects us all. $695 people. That's how many were killed by the tri-state tornado. And unfortunately, 1/3 of these deaths were children, killed as their schools collapsed against the strong winds. The final death would occur almost a year after the storm, when on January 3rd, 1926, Gervais
Somebody died from injury?
Burgess, a coal miner from West Frankfort, died due to the injuries sustained by the storm. As we started this video off by saying, this tornado holds so many records. The most deaths in the United States, the longest track at 217 miles, and the longest duration at 3 hours and 45 minutes. It's close to the highest forward moving speed as well, at 73 miles per hour.
Wow. That's crazy. That's outrageous. Right? That's outrageous. Of that My Turn, I requested that like weeks ago. There are no turns. There have never been any turns, and then it will never be turns. I have 2 more videos that I will definitely watch today. It's that simple. You still don't learn.
The highest verifiable speed is 78 miles, coming from the 1974 Guin tornado. All these facts, and yet there is still so much we don't know. The biggest factor being what this storm looked like. This is the most baffling thing to me. There are no photos or videos of this thing. Videos kinda make sense. The oldest tornado video would come 8 years later in 1933, but the oldest videos date back to the 1870s. But what doesn't really make sense?
Well, why would you expect, like, the thing is, like, why would you expect, you know, anything like that, to be fair? Why would you expect that, to be honest? Videos, right? It's the 1920s.
To me is the lack of pictures. The oldest pictures of tornadoes date back to the 1890s, and we have tons of photos of tornadoes from them until the 1930s. So why wasn't this thing that lasted for 4 hours and 200 miles not photographed? No one thought to stop and take a photo of this thing as it moved on? Well, part of the issue of not having a photo is due to the fact that the tornado gave no warnings at all. The weather forecast for that day said probable rain. No clue that a tornado would hit. The word tornado was banned from weather forecast at this point too. And after the storm hit, were tornadoes suddenly taken seriously? Did we do anything to be prepared should something of this magnitude hit again? No, we didn't. It wouldn't be until 1950 that we started to take them more seriously. 25 years later. But due to our advances in tornado forecasting, it's likely that the Tri-State Tornado will forever keep its deadliest title. Let's hope so, at least. Hey, thanks for watching. If you like hearing me yap,
Well, that's pretty much the end of the video. That was a long one. So to summarize, this whole thing happened because pretty much nobody was prepared for it. That's pretty much what happened. Nobody expected this to happen. And that's how we got here, right? These people sadly died because nobody expected this, right? They essentially banned the word tornado even from weather forecasting. So there's that, and that's that. Wow. And now the question is, will there ever be another one like this? That can be, right? Actually, I'd argue there can be, right? With, you know, the world getting a bit more, how do you say this? Rougher every year, right? It wouldn't be surprising, honestly, right? We have more heat waves than ever, right? More storms that are, while they aren't as devastating as that, the average storm is getting more devastating, right? More flooding. But well, we'll have to see. We'll have to see. But instead of working to prevent or working to be ready, we try to prevent when we cannot prevent. So there's that.